In a bustling, sunny village, there was a man named Bayo who had a wife named Amina. Amina was known for her kindness and was adored by everyone in the village. But one evening, Bayo held a massive secret. He knew where Amina was. She hadn't truly left for the heavens. Because of this, Adisa put on a show of grief for the villagers, but inside his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of marrying another woman, Amina's close friend. He kept this secret locked tight, not even sharing it with his closest confidants. Every night, as he gazed up at the stars, a small seed of fear grew inside him, knowing the truth of Amina's fate. And so, the heavy secret remained with Bayo, while the village mourned, believing that Amina had vanished forever. In the present, Adisa tries to go on with life as if nothing had changed. He laughs with the villagers and works diligently on his farm, but deep down, he feels annoying fear and sadness. When he's alone, he hears soft whispers in the wind, voices that sound eerily like Amina's. Sometimes in his dreams, Amina returns, her face etched with sorrow, asking him, "Why Bayo?" Though Adisa wants to move on and marry Amina's friend, the memory of that fateful night under the mango tree keeps haunting him. Whenever he walks through his backyard, the earth feels different, heavier beneath his feet. He knows he should feel excited about his future plans, but the weight of his secret crushes his spirit, making his heart feel like a boulder. He wonders if he'll ever find peace again, or if the rustling of the leaves will always carry Amina's story. Meanwhile, the village begins to notice a change in the air, a strange tension creeping in as the nights grow colder and the wind seemed to howl more fiercely than ever, and sometimes Bayo's doors would slam shut even when there wasn't a breeze. The large mango tree, where Bayo and Amina once sat together, began to drop its fruit before it was ripe, the mangoes thudding heavily to the ground. Villagers whispered among themselves, "Do you feel it, that chill when you pass Adisa's house?" Some would murmur, "Maybe it's Amina's spirit, maybe she's not at peace." They speculated that spirits sometimes return when they have unfinished business. But Bayo refused to believe these whispers. "It's just the wind, just the old tree," he would say loudly, laughing a bit too much. Still, he couldn't ignore the goosebumps prickling his skin whenever he was home alone, though he tried to convince himself it was all just silly superstition. Instead of dwelling on the strange happenings, Adisa focused on Myra, Amina's close friend. Myra was gentle and kind, her smile faintly reminding him of Amina. Bayo began visiting Myra, bringing her gifts of yams and honey, sitting with her, and attempting to charm her into becoming his wife. Yet, each time he spoke with Myra, a sudden gust of wind would stir the leaves, making the curtains flutter as if they were alive. And at night, the eerie sounds around his house grew louder, like someone softly calling his name. The more Bayo ignored the signs, the stronger they became, as if they were trying to send him an important message. Yet he continued to brush them off, focusing all his charm and affection on Myra. But deep inside, a creeping fear began to take root, a fear that perhaps the villagers' whispers were right. Maybe Amina's spirit truly was stirring, and just maybe it was seeking justice. Then, one morning, when the sun softly painted the sky in hues of orange, Bayo decided it was time to propose to Myra. He dressed in his finest shirt, the one adorned with patterns of the great river, and combed his hair until it lay perfectly smooth. In his hands, he held a small woven basket filled with the sweetest oranges from his garden, his heart fluttering like a caged bird. Myra was tending to her flower garden when Bayo arrived, her hands deep in the soil. She greeted him with a warm smile, but when he mentioned marriage, her smile faded, and she hesitated, her hands motionless in the earth. "Bayo, Myra began, her voice trailing off as she searched for the right words. "I loved Amina very much. She was like a sister to me. It feels too soon, and without her, it feels strange." Bayo nodded, trying to mask the flicker of worry in his eyes. "I understand, Myra, but life must move on, and we must find happiness where we can," he replied, his voice almost convincing. As they spoke, a cold breeze swept through the garden, chilling them despite the warm morning sun. Myra shivered, glancing around, an unease creeping up her spine. The flowers in her garden swayed violently, as if in protest, though the wind was barely there. "Did you feel that?" Myra whispered, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "It's just a chilly morning," Bayo responded, perhaps a bit too quickly. His eyes darted nervously around, half expecting Amina to appear before them. He reached out to take Myra's hand, but just as their fingers were about to meet, the ground beneath them trembled ever so slightly. A single beautiful flower from Amina's favorite bush suddenly withered and died right before their eyes. Myra pulled her hand back, her heart racing. "Bayo, I need time to think about this," she stammered, her loyalty to Amina tangling her emotions like the vines in her garden. Bayo left Mara's house with a heavy heart, the basket of oranges still in his hand, untouched and unwanted. As he made his way back home, the air around him felt heavier, and the whispers of the villagers seemed to follow him, murmuring about spirits and unsettled deaths. That night, as Bayo tried to sleep, the image of the wilting flower haunted him. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of something unseen, and Bayo tossed and turned, his mind consumed with guilt and fear. The more he tried to push forward, the tighter the grip of the past became, reminding him of the dark secret buried just outside his window. One morning, after a sleepless night filled with uneasy dreams, Bayo decided he could no longer bear the strange occurrences and the suffocating guilt alone. He made his way to the outskirts of the village, where an ancient, wise woman lived. Her small hut was surrounded by strange herbs and trees that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. The villagers often said the old woman could speak to spirits and uncover hidden truths. As Bayo approached her hut, the wise woman was sitting outside, her eyes closed, as if listening to the whispers of the wind. Without opening her eyes, she spoke, "I've been expecting you, Bayo." A cold shiver ran down his spine as he sat down across from her, the cool earth beneath his feet. "I need your help," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Strange things are happening at my home. I hear whispers, and objects move by themselves." The wise woman opened her eyes, her gaze piercing right through him, as if she could see the very depths of his soul. "The spirits are restless," she said, her voice slow and deliberate. "They speak of darkness, and your heart is heavy with guilt." Bayo's heart pounded in his chest, fear mixing with his growing desperation. "How do I make it stop? How do I bring peace back to my home?" he asked, hoping for a quick fix, a simple answer. The wise woman sighed, her voice weighed down by the burden of her wisdom. "The only way to calm the spirits is to confess your sins. The truth must be brought to light to heal the damage you have caused." Bayo's breath caught in his throat. Confess? He couldn't possibly reveal what he had done to Amina. The consequences would be devastating. He would lose everything, his respect, his standing in the village, and possibly even his freedom. "No, there has to be another way. Can't you perform a ritual or give me a charm?" he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. The wise woman shook her head, her expression grave. "Some disturbances are beyond the power of herbs and charms. Your spirit is bound to the secret you've buried. Until you release that truth, neither you nor the spirit that haunts you will find peace." Bayo shot up from his seat, the chair scraping loudly against the ground. "I can't," he muttered, more to himself than to her, turning to leave. "Be warned, Bayo," the wise woman called after him. "Secrets buried in darkness have a way of surfacing. It's better to be the one who reveals them than the one who is exposed." As Bayo walked back toward the village, her words echoed in his mind, growing louder with every step. Fear gnawed at him, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see Amina's spirit trailing behind him, her eyes filled with sadness and accusation. That night, as the wind howled around his house and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, Bayo knew the wise woman had been right. But still, he couldn't bring himself to do what she had said. Bayo lay in bed, watching the moonlight flicker across the floor, the weight of his secret pressing on him like a suffocating blanket. He wondered how long he could endure this haunted life, and what it might cost him in the end. Despite the wise woman's warning and the restless nights, Bayo made the decision to move forward with his plans to marry Mara. He thought, perhaps, marrying her might somehow quiet the disturbances that plagued him. With a heavy heart, he began preparing for the wedding, hoping the busy distractions would drown out the eerie happenings around his home. The village buzzed with excitement over the upcoming wedding. Tents were raised, vibrant cloths draped everywhere, and the villagers eagerly lent their hands to help. But around Bayo's house, the air remained thick and cold, even on the sunniest days. As the preparations continued, the strange occurrences only grew more intense. One evening, while Bayo and Myra were discussing the wedding feast in his living room, a sudden gust of cold wind swept through the house, snuffing out all the lamps. In the dark, they both saw it, a silhouette of a woman standing at the window. She looked eerily like Amina, her eyes filled with sorrow, her presence chilling. Bayo blinked, and the figure was gone. But Myra had seen it too. "Was that Amina?" Myra whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "It was just a shadow, Myra, nothing more," Bayo replied, though his words felt hollow, even to him. But Myra couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. She began to ask more questions, her suspicion growing. "Bayo, tell me the truth. What really happened to Amina? Everyone says she just disappeared, but now I'm not so sure." Bayo felt cornered, the weight of his secret burning inside him like fire. He avoided Myra's eyes, stumbling over his words. "Amina left, Myra. She just left one night, and I don't know where she went." But the lie felt shallow, and Myra sensed it. Her sleep became plagued by dreams of Amina, calling out to her, begging to be found. The more Myra questioned Bayo, the more evasive he became, and the more suspicious she grew. As the wedding day drew near, the supernatural incidents intensified. Cots would clatter to the floor without anyone touching them, and at night, somber singing drifted through the village. The villagers, once excited about the wedding, now whispered in hushed tones, their joy turning into concern. One afternoon, while Myra was arranging flowers for the ceremony, she saw Amina's reflection in a mirror. Her image was clear, sorrowful, her lips moving as if trying to speak. Frozen in fear, Myra watched as the reflection pointed toward the backyard, toward the spot where Amina had once loved to garden. Shaken, Myra confronted Bayo again, more forcefully this time. "I saw her, Bayo. Amina was in the mirror, and she was pointing to the backyard. Please, for the love of the spirits, tell me what happened to her." Seeing the fear and determination in Myra's eyes, Bayo knew he could no longer keep the truth buried. The guilt, the hauntings, and now Myra's insistence were too much for him to bear. Under the shadow of the large mango tree, the same tree under which he and Amina had shared so many joyful moments, Bayo finally broke down. With tears streaming down his face, he confessed everything. He told Myra about the argument, about his selfish desire to remarry, and about the dreadful night when he silenced Amina forever. He had buried her alive, beneath the very earth she once tended to, all to keep his secret hidden. His voice cracked as he relived that night, when the moon had been just a thin sliver in the sky, and Amina's cries had faded into the cold silence of the soil. Myra stood in shock, her heart heavy with the weight of Bayo's confession, the truth finally revealed but far too late to mend the damage done. Bayo and Amina had once sat under the large mango tree in their backyard, the night air still and quiet, with only the soft rustling of leaves to break the silence. That fateful evening, Bayo had turned to Amina and said, "Amina, I want to take another wife, a woman from the next village." Amina, taken aback and heartbroken, couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had loved Bayo deeply, thinking they were happy together. "No, Bayo," Amina said gently, her voice filled with sadness. "You shouldn't do this. We promised to always be there for each other." Bayo, frustrated by her response, became angry. "I will do as I please," he shouted. But Amina stood firm, rising to her feet. "I can't let you do this, Bayo. It's not right." That night, in a moment of terrible weakness and rage, Bayo made a horrible decision. While Amina was asleep, he carried her to a small, hidden spot in the backyard. His mind clouded by selfishness, he thought, if Amina won't agree, then I'll make sure she can never say no again. And so, he buried her there, in the darkest shadows where the moonlight barely reached. Amina would never speak again. Myra listened, horror-stricken and heartbroken, as Bayo finally confessed. Her world felt as if it had shattered beneath her feet. Tears welled in her eyes as she stumbled away from Bayo, her heart racing with grief and disbelief over what she had just heard. Bayo watched helplessly as Myra fled, disappearing into the trees, the weight of his sins heavier than ever, crushing him under the weight of his guilt and fear. He knew that once Myra told the villagers what he had done, his life in the village would be over. He would be shunned, hated, and perhaps even punished by the village's laws. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Bayo sat alone, consumed by his thoughts. The idea of fleeing crossed his mind. He could leave in the night, find a new village, and start over somewhere no one knew of his crime. But as he packed a few belongings, he realized how futile this plan was. He was too entangled in his lies, too rooted in this village. No matter where he went, his guilt would follow him. The haunting visions of Amina and the strange disturbances in his home only seemed to grow stronger, as if reminding him that he couldn't escape his past. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, felt like an accusation, a reminder of the grave he had dug in his own backyard. Desperate and cornered, Bayo felt a surge of panic. He stopped packing and wondered if he could survive the village's wrath. Could he face their judgment? He imagined their faces twisted in anger, no longer seeing him as a neighbor, but as a monster. In a moment of desperation, Bayo considered one last, desperate plan: to deny everything. He could claim that Myra was lying or mistaken in her grief. But as he thought it over, the idea seemed hollow. Myra had known Amina too well to fabricate such a story, and deep down, Bayo knew he couldn't bear to live under more lies. The truth, however dark, was out now, and there was no way to bury it again. As night fell over the village, Bayo sat in his darkened home, the sounds of the night mocking his fear. He knew that all he could do was wait for the dawn, and for Myra to reveal his secret. The thought terrified him, but there was also a strange sense of relief. Soon, the weight of his secret might finally be lifted, whether for better or worse. With a heavy heart, Bayo spent the night awake, waiting for the first light of morning and the confrontation that would come. He knew that the next day would likely change his life forever, and he braced himself for the judgment of the villagers and the consequences of his unforgivable actions. At dawn, as the sky glowed with pink and orange hues, the village awoke to a day that would be etched in its history. Myra, having spent a sleepless night tormented by grief and anger, gathered her courage and walked to the center of the village. Her steps were firm, her resolve to seek justice for her friend unyielding. Gathering the villagers around the old banyan tree, where important decisions and meetings were traditionally held, Myra's voice trembled as she began recounting Bayo's horrific confession. Her words fell like heavy stones into the silent morning, each revelation more shocking than the last. The villagers listened, their initial disbelief giving way to horror and finally, to fiery anger. As Myra spoke of Amina's burial place in Bayo's backyard, a murmur rose among the crowd. The betrayal by one of their own left them enraged, crying out for justice. Led by the village shaman, a wise and revered figure, the villagers marched to Bayo's house, their faces set with grim determination, their hearts heavy with the weight of betrayal. Bayo watched from his doorway, pale and trembling. He knew there was no escape from the truth now. His eyes, filled with fear, met Myra's, which were full of accusation. The villagers began to dig in his backyard, and it didn't take long. Soon, the sound of a shovel hitting something solid echoed through the crowd, followed by a collective gasp as they unearthed Amina's remains. Her clothes, though tattered, were still recognizable, and her bones lay as a grim testament to her fate. The village shaman stepped forward, his face solemn as he addressed the crowd. "This is a dark day for us," he began, his voice carrying sorrow and authority. "Amina was one of us, and she was wrong. We cannot let her spirit wander in unrest. Justice must be served, for her and for us." The villagers nodded in agreement, their faces hard with the need for justice. Discussions began about what should be done. While some demanded immediate punishment, the shaman advised careful consideration, reminding them of the importance of justice and balance in their community. Bayo was taken to a holding area, watched over by the village elders, as the shaman consulted with the council. It was decided that the proper authorities would be called to handle the matter officially, ensuring that justice was served, not just in the eyes of the village, but in accordance with the law. Throughout the day, the shaman performed rituals to appease Amina's spirit, asking for her forgiveness and for peace to return to the village. Incense burned, prayers were chanted, and offerings were made, all part of the solemn promise to right the wrongs that had been done. The day wore on, heavy with the weight of truth and the pursuit of justice. The villagers, united in their grief and shock, leaned on one another, their bonds growing stronger in the aftermath of the betrayal. Though shaken, they showed resilience, determined to reaffirm the strength of their community. As the sun set on the village that day, a somber calm descended over the homes. They had faced a dark truth, but in their pursuit of justice, they rediscovered their values and their unity. They hoped that Amina's spirit could now rest, and with it, the village could begin to heal from the deep wounds of betrayal. The day of the ritual of atonement arrived, and a heavy, solemn mood hung over the village like a thick fog. The villagers dressed in white, symbolizing purity and renewal, gathered once more around the old banyan tree. This time, the gathering was meant to heal, to cleanse the pain that had seeped into their lives. The shaman, draped in ceremonial robes, prepared the ritual space with sacred herbs and symbols drawn in the earth around the tree. The air filled with the scent of burning sage, and soft, mournful chants rose from the villagers, their voices weaving a tapestry of sorrow and hope. At the center of the gathering stood Bayo, his face gone, the weight of his guilt carved into his features. As the shaman approached him, he handed Bayo a small bowl filled with water and herbs, symbolizing purification. The shaman's voice rang clear and steady as he addressed the village. Today, we gather not only to seek justice but to restore peace to our community and to Amina's spirit, who was wronged. Let the truth be spoken here, and let the heart burdened with guilt be cleansed. Turning to Bayo, the shaman continued, "Speak your truth, confess your deeds and seek forgiveness from Amina's spirit and from your community." With trembling hands, Bayo took the bowl and drank the bitter water, a symbol of his willingness to cleanse his soul. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he began his confession. "I wronged Amina, my wife, whom I promised to protect and cherish. In a moment of selfishness, I took her life because she stood in the way of my desires. I buried her in our backyard, hiding my crime from all of you." The villagers listened, their faces a mix of horror, sadness, and compassion. Tears flowed freely as the weight of Bayo's confession sank into their hearts. "I am deeply sorry for the pain I have caused, to Amina, to Myra, to all of you," Bayo continued, his voice breaking. "I seek forgiveness, though I know I may not deserve it." The shaman led the villagers in a chant, asking the spirits to cleanse Bayo and bring peace to Amina's spirit. He then passed a feather around the circle, instructing each person to hold it and offer a prayer for healing and forgiveness. As the feather passed from hand to hand, each villager added their voice to the ritual, their words forming a powerful force of unity and healing. When the feather returned to the shaman, he placed it in a clay pot and buried it beneath the banyan tree, symbolizing the burial of past wrongs and the planting of new beginnings. Finally, the shaman asked everyone to join hands, forming a circle around the tree. "Let this circle represent our unity and our commitment to peace and justice," he said. "May we move forward as a community, stronger and wiser from our trials." As the ritual concluded, the village felt a subtle shift in the air, a lightness, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Though the pain of the past could not be erased, the ritual of atonement brought a sense of closure and hope for renewal. Bayo stood quietly, the reality of his confession and the forgiveness offered by the community washing over him. He knew his journey toward atonement had only just begun, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps one day he could find peace within himself. In the days that followed, the village slowly began to heal, though the memory of what had happened remained fresh in everyone's minds. Bayo, having confessed his grievous actions, became a figure of solemn isolation. While the community had forgiven him during the ritual, they could not forget the atrocity he had committed. As a result, Bayo was shunned and forced to live on the outskirts of the village, separated from the daily joys of his neighbors. His heart, once filled with laughter and love, now stood as a quiet reminder of his misdeeds. He spent his days in solitude, tending to a small garden he had started in an effort to ease his troubled mind. Yet, even as the plants and flowers bloomed, they could not erase the haunting memories of his past. He often paused, staring at the quiet earth, reminded of the grave he had once dug in his backyard. The villagers, for their part, worked to restore peace and ensured that such a tragedy would never again disturb their community. They established a council to address grievances and conflicts, a move inspired by their collective resolve to protect every member without resorting to secrecy or silence. They also honored Amina's memory by creating a community garden in her name, planting flowers and trees where she was once buried. The garden became a place of beauty and reflection, a vital part of the village's life, not only to honor Amina, but to serve as a lesson about the value of life and the importance of speaking out against wrongdoing. Each year, the villagers gathered in the garden to celebrate Amina's memory, reaffirming their bonds and teaching their children the importance of justice and compassion. Though Bayo was never part of these gatherings, his presence on the outskirts of the village was a quiet reminder of the past. The village shaman would visit him occasionally, offering counsel and ensuring that he was not neglected, for the community believed in justice, tempered with mercy. As the years passed, Bayo grew older and frailer, his life a shadow of what it might have been. The weight of his isolation bore down on him, each day a reflection of the grave mistake he had made. Yet, through his solitude, he found a certain clarity. He came to understand the depth of his wrongdoing and the ripple effect it had caused, not only on himself but on the entire village. His story, tinged with sorrow and regret, became a cautionary tale told by the elders, a lesson to the young about the fragility of trust and the consequences of betrayal. In this way, the village found peace, weaving together the threads of loss, forgiveness, and resilience. Amina's memory lived on in the blossoms and shade of the trees, whispering reminders of renewal to all who walked the paths of the garden that bore her name. As for Bayo, his days ended quietly. His story, a painful chapter in the village's history, served as a reminder to all that redemption is not always found in the forgiveness of others, but in the solemn acknowledgement of one's own faults and the lonely journey of atonement. I hope you liked the story. If you did, feel free to share it with your friends and family, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more captivating tales like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.